Hello, everybody, and welcome to another BioRAFT EHS Community Connection webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about conflict resolution techniques. Conflict, as you will learn, is something that really underlies the foundation of almost everything we as humans do, and certainly a lot of what we do as scientific health and safety professionals. So I am very excited to have Jonathan and Pam on today to talk through this subject. They are both extremely knowledgeable about resolving conflicts, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of great conversation had. But now, before we get started, just a quick reminder that for these webinars, we very intentionally set up our Q&A to be wide open, to allow all of you to ask questions, to respond to each other's questions, to have side conversations. This is about making a space for all of us to connect and share ideas and not just having the three of us be a bottleneck for information. So if you go over to your Zoom webinar control panel, click on that Q&A button. You'll open up the tab and you'll be able to ask questions there. It's a much easier way to keep track of everything than going into the chat where, 3 messages later and all of a sudden your question is lost forever. So I definitely recommend going there, asking questions as we go. There have been webinars where we've had a lot of side conversations or times where the questions have been more integrated into our conversations, and I've always found those to be a lot of fun. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists and let them introduce themselves. So Pam, would you mind getting started?
Sure, no problem. My name is Pam Brooks Richard, and I have been an organizational consultant for over 20 years. My specialty is, I want to say, human performance, anything to do with why we do what we do, the workings in our brain, how teams function together. And it stemmed from my experience as a college athlete. I was one of 5 freshmen. I was the only one to graduate. And when I watched the athletes fail, it wasn't just, oh, I'm not going to play anymore. The identity crisis that happened was like, I'm turning to alcohol, I'm turning to drugs, I'm falling out of school, and it was devastating. And so I really kind of got into this. How do we understand what it takes for people to succeed? How do we understand more about them? And so along the way, I took communications. I have a degree in organizational interpersonal. I have a degree in counseling. And conflict management, as Jonathan knows, is just one of those things that goes along when you're working with those things. So had the pleasure of working with him at one point at ASU, but I've also been running my own private business for many years. And my most recent certification was with Brene Brown on Dare to Lead. So that's a little bit about me. Consummate learner. You see the books in my background, they're real. That's not just a backstep. And my daughter says, the scary part, my mom's read them all.
It was so funny when we had our webinar panelist introduction call. I think I had the same thought of like, wow, that background editing is so good. Like that just looks like it's real. Well, Jonathan, would you mind introducing yourself now?
Sure. Hard to follow up from Pam. And I did the same thing when she and I did a Zoom a while back. It's like, is that real or is that virtual? And yeah, this is a wonderful topic, and I'm really thrilled to be here. I am our, meaning at BioRAFT, our Director of Risk Management and Safety Education. It's a relatively new position, and it's a lot of fun. And I do a lot of stuff for our community, of course, but my background is varied, as a lot of us, as Pam's is, and it's a lot of years in consulting. I think that really formed a lot of who I am professionally and how I saw the world and what I was doing. The life of a consultant, as I'm sure Pam would also say, is solving problems and figuring out things on behalf of your client. Sometimes it's solving the problem that the client doesn't realize that they have too, which can be a little tricky, right? But it was always a blast. And then I started teaching, and after teaching for a few years at a technical college in Maine, teaching occupational health and safety, I was asked to then start teaching as an adjunct at a business college, and started doing electives in environmental health and safety and risk, and quickly transitioned into business management courses. So I started teaching conflict management and marketing management and a few other business practice courses. And that additionally propelled me into this field more, where as a consultant, I had several clients tell me, hey, John, you got great technical skills and all, and great, and there's a lot of IHs out there, but we need someone that knows how to work with people and talk people down and help resolve conflicts, and some of which I might end up, chatting about briefly today. And so then spending 8.5 years as Pam said, at ASU, and a little bit in that time period at UC Davis, being a mediator, being the person responsible to try to implement things, solving problems. It was a lot of fun. It gave me wonderful opportunities to really explore this area, and I truly feel blessed by it.
Fantastic. Great. And I'm excited to dig into the questions here and really hear what you all have to say about this subject. And just a quick heads up on, I think something that we might try this time is, in these sorts of situations where we have two panelists, a very difficult subject that usually requires greater detail, maybe we'll be able to bring some of you live on the air to talk through your questions and share that with everybody. So definitely indicate that in your comment in the Q&A if you'd like to come live and talk to us later on in the webinar, and we'll bring you on. So to kick things off, I think laying a foundation about sort of what makes up different types of conflict will be a good way to start. So Pam, could you tell us about the different types of conflict that are out there, and some ways to maybe identify which ones are happening when you're right in the heat of the moment and, maybe tensions are a little high?
There's so many ways to approach this. The types of conflict. When we think about it with people on a simple level, it's a task that needs to be done or a personal conflict, something about the two people that don't mash up. Okay, so that's kind of looking at a fundamental level. Either, we're looking at the task and we both have a different opinion about how it's supposed to be done, or we look at the solution to it and we go, God, who are they? They're screwy. So we get kind of the people element of it. But the reality is when we start looking at conflicts, there is the area of information. So if we're looking at a conflict, is it that we need more information, that we don't have information, that it's incomplete, it's biased, it doesn't come from, so we can look to that to kind of go, okay, where are we getting our information? What's there? Do we have too much, too little? What's happening? Sometimes the environment affects like what's happening in a conflict. So think about the last time you had to have a team meeting and the room started getting really hot. Like the agitation in the room will naturally go up just because the room is really hot. Or people don't want to talk because it's getting really cold. And so sometimes, even a smell in the room that's like nasty, like all of a sudden people are like smelling smoke, like, oof, we can get irritated. The spacing in it, and think about COVID right now. We're all at 6 feet. Like that's a different experience for people than like when we're all crowded into a space. We haven't had that in a while, but that type of stuff in terms of environmental factors. Think about environment too in terms of positioning. You go into your boss's office and they're in that big chair and you're sitting in the little tiny one across from the table, like, woo, intimidating. Environment, again, adds to whatever the conflict is. The other is skill set. So we look about trying to accomplish something and think about trying to do something you've never done before. And you're scared to death, you're working at it, you're trying it, and you're screwing up, and you have the micromanager behind your back, right? Like, ooh, I have that fear of failing, so I'm now worse than I was before just trying to accomplish the skill, versus a situation where you've practiced it 100 times, you really know it, you walk in, you're competent, you're confident, and you can take off and get it done. And so sometimes we have issues over skill, even like how to do it. I was listening to a talk by Marcus Buckingham recently, and he said, think about the perfection of a skill, as simple as throwing a basketball. Like that's something we should be able to describe and say, here's how you do the skill, and we perfect it. And yet, if you look at the top free throw shooters from basketball over the ages, they all had different techniques. There's even one guy that did the underhand toss, and one that, and so here's a skill, simple. The object is to get the ball through the hoop, and yet the perfection of how to do that skill can be very different. And so sometimes we have conflict because one person goes, no, we need to do it, and we're going to do it my way. And the other person's like, well, I've done it 100 times, but I do it another way. So that skill and understanding what we do or how we do it can become part of the conflict. A clash over values of what we see as important. So I've worked with the capital projects team, for example, at an institution. And I met with everybody individually because I wanted to find out what's the elephant in the room, what are we having conflict about? And it dawned on me that they never set criteria that said, here's the prioritization by which we're going to make a decision. Here are the things that we feel are important. So I saw 6 people, and 6 people all had different ideas of what was important. And they never sat down as a team and said, here's what we're going to value and why. And so that was like my first thing, is to just get them to iron that out, and to also kind of have that agreement about here's how we're going to even communicate with each other about how to do that. So if we have a values difference, and again, it's one that it's okay to have a values difference, but sometimes labeling it, just like labeling the information problem or the environment problem, then we're keeping it at the something instead of the personal level. Because now we can label, we're reducing the judgments, like, you have the wrong priority. No, you have not, we agreed on this priority. We put the larger something out there for us instead of it being between us. And then identity issues. And this, I think, is really big today, especially with Black Lives Matters and Asian things and different races and cultures. And we're such a melting pot of people. And even amongst those different things, even though somebody might be Black, their experience compared to the other Black person is very different. And so we have a difficult time sometimes identifying who we are. And if we don't take time sometimes to be able to express that, or have a team where we get to know each other so we really understand each other for who we are, we wind up with conflict, because our natural brain reaction is to go, God, you know what, Matt, you're not like me, you suck. Or, and it's not like I consciously do that, but you're out there on that thing, you have a different background screen, like you're different than me because of your background screen, right? And so this identity issue becomes huge. And now think about, add power to that, add gender to that, add, experience. Like I came from Harvard and you came from Stanford, and we can add all these identity factors into it. And unless we can kind of honor or respect whatever the identity is, we can sometimes have that become the clash power. And so, like, for example, sometimes when I'm working with teams, especially like this capital project team, I have people of VP, I have people of executive, I have these different power things in the room. And the first thing that I do is I go, look, I know we all have different titles. I know we are all from different positions, and we may even have all different levels of experience. But today, and for this meeting, we're on the same plane. Like, we're going to take all of that and just put it out of the way. And what we're going to do today is, you're a human being and I'm a human being, and we're going to have a discussion about this. And so those are some of, I want to say, the factors. So when we start looking, and I worked with a formal group with conflict negotiation, you go in and you try to identify what are those things, like if it was divorcing parents or a director that's about ready to get sued because we want to go in and we want to identify where's an information gap, where's something going on in the environment that might be screwy, what are the skill sets of the people involved, do we just need to improve the way they communicate with each other even, like that might be it. Is there a values discrepancy? And so anytime we can identify it, and then we take, instead of looking at this is between us, and we can go, this is out here, and we know that this is the larger idea of what it is we want to accomplish, we can keep the project in front of us instead of those things that are different between us. So that's a simple way.
It's so funny the way that when you mentioned sensing conflict in a group, like of 6 different people, and then taking them separately to sort of figure out what the elephant in the room was, it reminded me of this other sort of common story about, 6 people with their eyes closed who are all describing different parts of an elephant, saying, oh, it's like a tree, it's like a whip, it's like a snake, that sort of thing. And they're all trying to figure it out, but they just have their narrow thing. It's not just what's this big thing nobody's talking about, but helping to have that outside perspective to create unity and synthesize all of these different perspectives into one thing that everybody can sort of work towards and help work with. And that reframing is just really valuable.
Yeah, and I think that's the part of it, because if we can go, okay, this guy's feeling the tail, so he says it's a rope, and we go, okay, there's a larger perspective, and this is peace, and this is true. We know this to be true. And then we hear this other piece, and that can also be true. And we're keeping the larger perspective. Now we're pulling in all the elements instead of attacking them and going, okay, now how do we put this together to get the full picture? Very much important.
Great. Jonathan, was there anything that you wanted to chime in on this particular thing before we move on?
It was really cool. I think all very, very excellent stuff. I love it. I think the only one little thing I would add is sometimes what's the true nature? What's the conflict behind the conflict? So, sometimes it's not what you think it is. We go in, so, I do health and safety, and I'm told that there's been some sort of chemical exposure and I need to figure it out. And I do. And as I explore it, I find out that, you know what, it's not a chemical exposure. Actually, it's an interpersonal conflict in a really bad way. And so only through really exploring with individuals, interview each person individually in a very comfortable setting, one-on-one, was I able to figure out the subtext below what, I was told apparently what it was about, but that was really just, masking and superficial to the undercurrent of the personalities involved.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the pieces of work in Brene Brown's workshop. She talks about emotional literacy. And when we look at people and we're in conflict, the base emotion that we'll usually see is mad, glad, sad. Like, they're pissed off, they're okay, they're on our side, or God, they vacated the room, kind of. Like we can identify that. But the real underpinning is if you look at the aspects of anger, anger presents, but anger can be the result of being overwhelmed. It can be because I'm intimidated, because I'm scared, or I'm anxious. And so that is very true, that when we see something, we need to be curious, and curiosity is the greatest way to get through any kind of negotiation. And because it opens my brain physically. If I ask a question of you, Jonathan, and I don't know the answer, my brain's cued into the fact that I ask a question, now I got to listen to you. Because I don't know the answer. I need to listen, not the prompting question where it's kind of leading, like, Jonathan, hey, what about this? And I'm already going, yeah, I know the answer, not that way, but asking a question I don't know the answer to, then you listen. But the same token, it opens the brain of the other person and says, hey, they asked a question of me. And instead of attacking me or giving me advice or telling me something, they want to hear something from me. So that opens their brain up to say something. And when you get curious again, to, like Jonathan said, to get to the underpinning, like, here's what we hear the conflicts about, but we start kind of unraveling it. That's where we can find out that, well, that person was pissed off, but they're not pissed off because something went wrong. They're pissed off because they felt taken advantage of, or whatever that is. And so it's that, how do we find out what's underneath the iceberg?
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
And a challenge.
But I think as a consultant, Jonathan, like you and me both, is like, what's the elephant? What's under the iceberg? Like, those are the questions and the curiosity I have, because if they tell me it's this, I know that that's really probably not the source of it.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. You got to be a little skeptical of what you're told.
And how do I, once I figure out what the elephant is, what's under the iceberg, how do I disentangle and really unpower the defensiveness that can flare up when you're afraid of being wrong or being confronted with something that you might not want to see and might be willfully ignoring or turning away from?
Oh, sure.
We've talked.
Just remember, I know there's a question that came up. Mad, glad, sad is what I'm saying.
Okay.
It came like mad, glad, sad. Those are kind of the primary things that we'll see. And just like we were talking about the conflict wheel, the emotion wheel is the same thing. And we as human beings are not taught from an early age sometimes to express our emotions or to talk about them. And that lack of identity of emotions usually adds another layer of depth to conflict. Yeah.
I first, I think, was exposed to the emotion wheel when I was seeing a counselor, which is a wonderful way to understand oneself and therefore a lot of other people in the world. And I still have it posted in my closet there. I can get it and show everyone if people are curious. But so one thing I learned was frustration is a subset under anger. So the overarching emotion is anger. So when people, you can tell they're frustrated, or if someone says, I'm frustrated, what they might not even realize in themselves is they're experiencing anger, whether they admit it or not, or realize it or not. That's what's really going on. And it helps, I think, for us to understand that at a very basic level, as Pam is saying.
So we've talked a little bit about how we can identify that conflict is happening and also even dig down deeper into what type of conflict it may be and understanding what those causes are. But then actually guiding it towards a resolution, sort of helping, like we mentioned, to get people to see what they might not be willing to see or want to see, helping them navigate their own emotions when they don't have the kind of training to make that easy is not always the easiest thing. So Jonathan, are there any particular examples from persuasion research that you've reviewed that would be helpful for people as they are trying to guide a conflict closer to a good resolution? Techniques, tools, tricks, any of that good stuff?
Yeah, there's as Pam and Matt know, there's a lot, and so I'll try to pick out a few of the more salient ones, I think. So this is a lot of what I study in my PhD program, is the nature of risk perceptions, and then persuasion and narrative or storytelling. So one thing to piggyback on what Pam was talking about is conversational receptiveness. And so taking something from the usual back and forth that's clearly not a dialogue, it's a debate where someone each is trying to win an argument, to making it conversationally receptive. So Michael Yeoman et al. Studied this fairly recently and found that I think it's intuitive. The more we can be open and demonstrate receptiveness, like Pam was saying, ask good open-ended questions, be curious, be genuinely curious about the other person's view instead of like Pam was saying, asking the pointed question that you already have in your head is quote unquote the correct answer. And philosophers, will, like Daniel Dennett and Alan Hayek, to name a couple, will say, hey, whenever someone says, here is the solution, that should automatically, set off a little bit of an alarm that they're locked into one thing. And how do we help them reframe and see that there's other possibilities? So a couple of quick things is also, so I'll go back to perhaps someone who started it, Blaise Pascal. He was a French scientist, inventor, philosopher, etc. And he said, basically, help the other person get to the decision, right? So how do we facilitate, facile, make easy, right? This decision-making process. How do we tease it out? How do we explore it? All of the things we've been talking about here. So for 350 years, we have known how to do this, and yet we're not necessarily very good. And I'll add one more, and then I'd love to hear, any others from Pam, et cetera. So Darwin and Michael Faraday, even before Darwin, but Darwin's better known for this in particular, preemptively address any counter arguments. And I'll frame it for folks who are in the same field that I am, environmental health and safety. And so when at ASU or UC Davis, when students would have to get an approval to proceed on a project, their professor or their mentor or whomever would say, hey, you got to go see the bald-headed safety guy, Jonathan. He's got to sign off on this. So they'd come to me. And those who came to me and said, hey, Mr. Klane, I'm like, no, Jonathan. Hey, Jonathan, here's what we want to do. And here's where we think the risks are. And here's how we're planning on addressing the risks. But we really want to hear from you. What do you think about what we've done so far? What have we missed? We really think we've got it solid. Darwin would say, before the other person can, you need to preemptively address the counter arguments. So for me, it's risk, right? And then Darwin said, and caulk the holes watertight. Because of course, he was on a ship, right? And so those students that did that in a very open, engaging, honest, transparent way, where they said, here's what we've come up with, but what else have we missed? That was an easy, fantastic, fun process. Then to contrast it briefly, the others would come to me and say, here's what we're planning on doing. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about the risks. They're like, no, there aren't any risks. I'm like, wait a minute, there aren't any risks? They're like, well, no, it's those risks really aren't that bad. And they tried to basically say there weren't risks, or the risks were less than they were. They just wouldn't address it. And I would tell them, so what you're doing is you're really forcing me into making the counter argument instead of you coming up with a counter argument for me. And so this means of, if we're going to our boss with something, we need to be open to other possibilities, yes, curious, ask open-ended questions, but also, if we can, caulk those holes watertight, as Darwin said.
Yeah, that was a lot, John.
Sorry.
Okay, give me the question one more time, Matt, because that was so much information. I want to get back to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes me glad that we're recording this webinar. So having those meetings where you think, oh gosh, I wish I was recording what I just said. I feel like I just said that perfectly. Now it's too much. So we just, spoke about identifying different types of conflict and how to help people see that happening. But now I'm wondering, are there any particularly good techniques that you've encountered for guiding that conflict towards a better resolution, from maybe persuasion research or just sort of, again, conflict leadership like you have experience with? Wondering if there's anything that our audience might be able to really take away as they're saying, okay, I've identified a conflict is happening. Maybe I've seen what type of conflict it is, or I've identified the problems, but I don't know how to get from A to B now. I just know that we're at A.
Yeah. Without a lot of training and understanding, Brene would say you have to embrace the suck. Like, there's not going to be any easy way to not deal with the conflict. If I want to say there's skill sets that you can learn that will give you confidence about how to approach without creating defensive responses in others. And there's ways I want to frame up the situation with which you're going to talk about conflict that can help reduce the tension. So like with Brene, she has like 11 steps where I go through this checklist and I go, okay, I'm ready to talk about this conflict because I'm ready to take the conflict and sit beside you. Like, I know I'm not going to be in front of you. I'm not like putting my gloves on. I've calmed down enough inside that I can sit down and have the conversation with you. Okay. That I know when I go in, I have the ability to be curious enough to hear what your side of it is. If I'm ready to go into it and I'm still going guns blazing, like, here's all the reasons I'm doing it my way, and this is the way it makes it perfect, I'm not open yet. I'm not going to resolve that conflict because I'm going in with my opinion right up front. If I'm ready to go in and say, look, when we talk about this, I'm going to respect you, you're going to respect me. It's not about us, but it's about the larger something that maybe our group, our organization, our team, or whatever it is that we both need to accomplish. We're putting that up front. We're at that point where we can do that. That's important. And then the other part is to be able to go, I'm ready to listen, but I'm also ready to be true. Because there's the people I want to say that be sticky nice. Like, I'm not going to tell you, Matt, that I really don't agree with this. And I'm going to be sticky nice. I'm going to beat around the bush instead of saying, hey, I don't mean this to be offensive. It's not directed at you, but this is what my experience is teaching me about this. So I want to make sure that that's heard. And then, like, you can ask more questions about it, or we can explore, where that is, or where flaws in my thinking are. So I'm leaving it open, but I'm able to say, I'm willing to do that. And so that's just an example of some of the stuff. If I'm working in a particular environment, so we just had this discussion today about shame in my class that I was in, and people are like, well, so how do we get past this? Like, how do we, set up? And I said, the biggest thing is when you're working with a group of people and you're working with a group of people, if I'm the leader, I have control of building a safe environment called safety. And I can put it in the link here, but I have the ability to be aware of a lot of different factors in the group to know this is how we're going to treat each other, so that I'm treating you equally. We're going to be fair. I'm going to give everybody autonomy. I'm going to make sure that everybody has a voice that's going to be heard, that power is going to be put off the table, that we're considered equal. Like, all these things I can frame in. And when we do that, we can create the safe environment to have a discussion and to be real with one another, instead of going, God, I'm not going to say that because I'm going to get my head cut off. Or worse, in organizations. I mean, I think about An example with Toyota, they had a brake recall on one of their pickup trucks. And when they dived in to figure out how did this happen, 2 engineers that were working on the brakes knew there were an issue, and they went forward to say, hey, I think we're going to have to redesign the brakes, and they were fired. Mom's word, nobody else is going to say anything. Like, I ain't going to get fired. Like, ooh, not a safe environment. And then it went up the line and nobody wanted to say anything because they were so afraid of what was going to happen to them that they couldn't even get to the negotiation. And so that's really kind of the important part, that 1, 2, like when I start thinking about conflict, the person that says, God, I need to have this discussion, you need to make sure that you're going to be in a safe space. So this is to know that there's no bullying going on, that you're not going to get retaliated against. You need to know you're safe in dealing with the conflict. But the safer space that you can frame in for that, the easier it is for both parties to kind of take their guard down. You know, Brené's references to armor, like fear, shame, armor goes up. And just like that, you know, criticism, oh yeah, defensive, yeah, you suck. Fine, we're out of here. And we do that. And that we have mirror neurons in our brain. So the moment that we see someone with piercing eyes and thin lips, it's like, ooh, I'm going to back away. You know, it's like my dog. I have a little dog, and sometimes I'll get up to her and she'll kind of give me that, and I'm like, okay, she's in a bad mood. I'm not going to go near her today. Right. We sense that, and we will mirror, or if we sense the threat, we will defend. And so that triggers it. And so the more we become aware of our trigger points, and we can keep ourselves at bay, or know that a discussion has gotten heated to the point that, like, literally, if our heart rate gets above 98 beats per minute, palms starting to get a little bit sweaty, chest tightening, anything like that. Once we know that, once the heart rate is above 98 beats per minute, we start shutting down our frontal cortex. We are not thinking anymore. We're not logic anymore. We are reacting. And we will say and do things that we will regret. And so we need to recognize, oh my God, I'm getting emotionally jacked here. I'm not fit for human consumption. I better not say anything. I better not text anything. I better not do anything. Like, I need to go get myself calmed down. And also then to recognize that in the other person. If the other person is getting heated, the best thing you can do is kind of like calm down by taking a deep breath and go, okay, yeah, we're not at a point that we're going to get a resolve right now. Why don't we take a break for a few minutes, or to get back tomorrow, whatever we need to do to put ourselves into that better space again of safety, so that we feel like we can address the problem and not the emotional pain that's going on in the room. So just a few thoughts.
Yeah, your story about the brakes at Toyota reminds me a lot of just this general concept that we all encounter of safety really comes from the top down. You know, if you want to talk about a foundation of safety, it has to start at the top, because if you don't have those basic assurances that by being honest, you won't be fired, you'll never be able to have those conversations where you can, you know, avoid conflict. It'll be, how do I minimize damage towards myself? How do I avoid a situation that might result in my being fired because, or, you know, my being retaliated against? And then I think at some level, because we don't always have control over the things that happen above us, sometimes we have to say, you know what, I'm the new ceiling, and communicate to other people and say, hey, you know, even though I don't have any control about what happens with my boss or my boss's boss, I can tell you, you know, here are the things that I'm going to do to try and make this environment as safe as I can. And, you know, that's what I can do. And sometimes I can really help people to hear that there's care present, even though there may be things that are outside of your control that you won't be able to change. And then also, one of my favorite things, when I find myself in a conflict situation, especially when somebody says something that I want to instinctively react negatively against, where I disagree, I've sort of started saying, before I even know why, you're right. You know what? You're right. Yeah, that's a great point. And then from there, after overcommitting, figuring out, okay, how do I actually see what this person is thinking? How do I, you know, adopt or adapt my own perception and understanding and empathy to understand their perspective? And that usually ends up, I think, setting other people off balance a little bit, having them say, wait a second, okay, thank you. You're actually hearing me. You're really understanding me, and paving the way for, you know, conversations going forwards.
Yeah, I would just add, I think what you're saying is great. And many, you know, be it from persuasion research, et cetera, conflict management research, all say the same thing that you got at, Matt. where can we find any little bit to agree with, and start with that. Always start with whatever you can, and agree, even if it's the least little thing, find something to bond over and agree on, and be curious and be open, and tease out, more about it if you're really struggling to, as I think all three of us have said, reframe from our perspective to the perspective of other persons. That's really key. How do we reframe? It's certainly a challenge I've had over the years a lot, and still have. How do I get out of my own head, my own vision of this, and truly embrace someone else's perspective, which is a great challenge to have, and a wonderful thing when it happens.
And it reminds me of, and I think, Jonathan, this is one of the things you came to. I was certified by Judith Glazer in conversational intelligence. And at a very fundamental level, so not going deep into anything, if we look at the level of our conversation and exchange, on the one extreme where we tend to be very resistant, we're in a tell and sell mode. If I am just getting like, Jonathan, you're going to do it like this, like, boom, like, yeah, like, so when we recognize that we're kind of in that mode, we have this ability to shift our conversations to move from a very reactive to a very transformational one. And so there's this diagram of looking at it. And what was fascinating is she tied our neurotransmitters to this thing. So when we're in this defense, like transaction mode, like I'm telling and you're telling, and we're just telling, we're striking cortisol, we're striking noradrenaline, adrenaline, and these are kind of the negative, I want to say, neurotransmitters, and they put our body at alert. And when we get too much of them, again, we shut down the frontal cortex. So it's that awareness, like self-awareness, like, ooh, I'm feeling it, and what's going on. And we start shifting the conversation again to more curiosity and question. Now, the second phase is transactional, and this is more like the bad car salesman. They start asking questions, or that person that comes in, hey, Jonathan, I got a question for you. Do you have a minute? And in your head, you're going, oh my God, they're going to ask something. And you can already feel yourself going, yeah, I don't know. I'm like in this not sure mode. But when we move to transformational and we think about that, it's like armoring ourselves with a bunch of curiosity questions that we don't have answers to. And so as I talked about here, the curiosity, if we move to asking questions, so even if I don't agree with your opinion, Matt, like in my head, like I am no, I can go, Matt, explain to me more why you feel this is really important. What is it that's set you in to understand? I can take that time to understand and appreciate where you're coming from. And that's going to give me better. But even in the act of doing that, I am now shifting the neurochemical meter over to connection. So maybe we get a little bit more oxytocin, or like Jonathan said, where we get something that we're unified about. That's your dopamine. That is some of those others. And we start making that shift to that other side. And so we have a neurochemical dance. Jonathan mentioned we have to have like 5 to 7 positive to 1 negative. Negative hormones last in our body for up to 12 hours. And the positive ones only last about 4 hours. And so you think about this, we really have to overcome that neurochemical dance, but we do that through very specific tools by watching our heart rate, breathing, by knowing that if I've passed my threshold, let's back away, and to move the conversation from a tell and sell mode on both sides to a curiosity mode of sharing time to talk and asking questions that we don't have answers to so that the other person expresses. And that's where we start kind of moving into that transformation of it's not you, it's not me, it's that collective whole that we're looking at.
All right. That was a lot to take in.
Sorry, I actually have a diagram I could try to put up for people, but I have to grab it.
Yeah.
Oh, no, not from your recent comments, but just more the conversations that we've had so far. I feel like there's just so much to the subject when you're trying to break into how do you navigate a conversation in real time as you are the one in the middle of it, and employ all of these sort of already difficult concepts and techniques. So I think right now we are going to be transitioning over to our Q&A portion. May go back into some of our prepared questions as well, depending on how time allows. And in the meantime, we are going to quickly take a break to look at our upcoming webinars. And I'm also going to go ahead and launch a poll for you all. So as many of you know, these are the EHS community connection webinars. We rely on you, our community, to help keep these going, whether it's letting us know what topics you're interested in and what sorts of webinars you'd like to see in the future. If it's letting us know whether you'd like to be a panelist or somebody in your network who would be a good fit. These webinars are possible because our panelists donate their time and expertise to make this space for us. So a huge thank you to Jonathan and Pam for making that possible. It wouldn't be, we wouldn't be here without them. And we'd love to keep these going as long as we can and make them valuable for you. So we can do that better when we know what you're interested in. So go ahead, let us know what some of these topics of interest might be. And we'll also let you know that we have some webinars coming up in 2 months, 2 weeks even. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about how to reduce your hazardous waste costs. After that, following up with a webinar talking about chemical inventory fire codes and the intersection of those two. And then also our newest webinar will be talking about how to gracefully shut down a lab group. When you have to halt or stop research operations completely, how do you do that? Both from a human perspective and a technical perspective, we'll be really trying to look at that whole process. And also take a moment to take a look at our word cloud, see what everybody's interested in from more of an open-ended perspective. And I really appreciate everybody who has taken the time to respond here, and we'll be going back and forth to this a little bit later. Now, one final reminder is that there is the Q&A panel over in your Zoom webinar control panel. If you open that up, there are already a few great questions from our audience asking about this topic. We'll be diving into those, sometimes even bringing somebody live on air. So I definitely recommend you go in there, ask any questions you have, help each other out. This is one of my favorite parts of the webinars. So I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of how that worked. Great, and without any further ado, we can get started. So first we're gonna hear from Mariel asking, Jonathan, would it be possible for you to give an example of a conflictive situation and what steps you took to come to a resolution? And also building on that, when is it necessary to involve your boss to help?
Yeah, I saw that in the Q&A, and I thought, which of the many will be helpful and brief enough? How can I boil it down? I think so really brief as background, one, I was a consultant, so there was my client, but it was really up to me. And then two, when I worked like at ASU and UC Davis, I was embedded in a college of engineering, and I reported up to the dean's level in each case. So it really was up to me to do. But to Marielle's point, when do you let them know? A lot of times my bosses just wanted that. So here's the thing that leadership does not want: surprises, bad surprises. So a lot of times I would go to them and say, here's what's going on. Here's what I'm doing. I may need your support. I may need, your help and all, but it's under control, and who do you need to bring into your team to really solve the problem? I think as Pam has been talking about so much, and I just have to come back to it. And Mark's question, Mark asked the question, how do you create trust? It is trust. So as health and safety people, we have incredible technical skills, and we tend towards wanting to make sure people have confidence in our skills. But this gets at, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And so how do I let people, how do I demonstrate that they can trust me? And so I'll give you one, I'll make it brief. A group of 3 workers were exposed to, in order, mold, bleach solution 50%, and then solvents. And it was in an office environment. So we're back to the air quality sort of an issue. And totally inappropriate. The people running it, leadership, knew they were wrong. I got brought in, I was a consultant, and was told, you're going into a hornet's nest. They're going to attack you. And sure enough, I get introed by my client. Well, not really my client. I'm reporting up to the system office. And And so, literally this is what I faced. The leader of this group of three, this woman, they were all women, says to me, I get introduced, I'm there to solve the problem, right? I'm Mark Twain's, what's an expert? A nincompoop from out of town. So they're looking at me and she says, why should we trust you? You're being paid by them, right? Only I think she was more forceful. And so how did I not develop confidence in my skills as an industrial hygienist? But how did I build trust, right? And so trust, and as Pam has been posting here, we're all on the same page on this. How do you develop psychological safety so that people feel that it's a safe space for them to speak up about things that they feel very, very deeply? And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. I talked about the issue of I've got to get paid by someone, but my role here is to make this right for you and to solve the problem. And the only way it's going to move forward is if you're okay with a solution that we create. And I'm happy to meet with you all privately to talk about it, to talk openly, but privately away from them. And them, they were right there. They knew it was their fault. And long story short, it took quite a while, but we were able to bond. When they laughed, I laughed with them. Pam's, I loved hearing about mirror neurons, right? And yeah, it's so much about the people and helping the people feel safe and develop that bond and that trust. I really hope that helps. There's always more, but we just don't have that much time.
Let's go ahead.
I'm just going to really quickly put a note into the other thing. Anything we can break down, we can build up. If I go in and go, God, Jonathan, I don't trust you. Whoo, we got this global thing in front of us. And I put in an article from Brene Brown because she really broke down trust into an acronym called BRAVING, which she found in research. And in it, she identifies aspects of what it is that we don't trust. And if I go, hey, Jonathan, you know what? I have an issue because you keep dishing on that other team. And I know that you're supposed to represent it, but you keep dishing on them. Like, I'm being more specific. Or the fact that we need to be generous and non-judgmental. And if I can go in the situation and go, God, I just feel like you're being pretty judgmental of us up front. Like, it seems like you've already come in with an open mind. Now I can address what it is that Jonathan's saying or doing that needs to change in order to build that trust back. So again, I put in the article, it's called BRAVING, BRAVING, and she walks through it. So we have to have boundaries. We have to have reliability. We do what we say we're going to do. We have to have accountability, and not the kind of accountability like, oh, I'm sorry, but gosh, Jonathan, we worked on that last project and it didn't happen the way we needed to. What are we going to do to fix that? The vault is knowing what we can say or not say. So there's that whole privacy type thing. And yet we think about it, if I go into a meeting and I'm dishing on somebody else, the people in the meeting are kind of going, God, are they dishing on me when I'm not in the room? We lose trust. And then again, the fact that we need to be very non-judgmental and generous. But again, that's another way to look at how do we pick something that we need to focus on and work on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very hard to rebuild trust after it's been harmed. A little bit easier, honestly, if you are not involved in that. You can say, you know what, yeah, they are bad. Tell me about the things they did to you. I'm the new person and I'm not going to be like that. That can be a really useful thing to also send somebody else in your stead if maybe something's happened with you that has caused some of this deterioration of trust as well. And kind of getting into that, we have a question from Mark asking, how can you create trust in a person or a group with a long history of distrust? So we're actually going to allow Mark to unmute here and come on and tell us a little bit more about his challenge. So welcome on the air, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. I'll just give you a very quick story. Years ago, I worked in mining, and it was a very rough and tumble environment. Historically, it was fraught with conflict that even spanned multiple generations. First time I had been involved in that kind of environment. Most of my experience was in the academic and research and healthcare world. But despite the conflict, safety became the bridge over the proverbial bridge, the bridge over proverbial troubled waters. And it created through consistency and integrity at a very organic level, the foundation where people could talk to each other. It didn't happen overnight. It was uneven often, but it was also, in my experience, successful because people at the group level displayed actions that were consistent with taking care of business, if you will, with respect to hazard control. So the only thing I wanted to really ask is, when you have a very, very tough situation where you know people don't trust each other from the get-go, is there, among the many tools that have been talked about today, is there one or two that you could leave us with, at least as a starting point?
When you have a team that doesn't trust it, you have to be able to identify, again, more specifically what it was that caused the distrust, because I can't counter that until I know what it is. And if we're just saying it at a global level of trust, we're not going to get there. And Brene talks about how trust is built in small increments. Like, I don't just go out and go, God, Matt, we're great friends, like I'm going to trust you with everything. We know people that do that, and they're the ones that get burned, right? If we're in a situation and we know, like in the Toyota thing, somebody got fired, like, man, I'm back. But if we can start to identify what those are, put in some ground rules of this is how we're going to respond to one another, and break that down, then slowly over time, we can see where that trust is being rebuilt. And I think the other part is that's hard sometimes is we go into situations, it's been deteriorated for a long time, and we continue to look for what's wrong instead of what's going right. And so as we're working to build that trust, we need to acknowledge, hey, Jonathan, you know what? I need to acknowledge that we had issues over this before, and I noticed that you've really made an improvement. Like, now I'm going to start building that trust back, right? Because there's something that we can tangibly go, hey, you did this and I recognize that. So that's the other part, is we have to shift our focus from what is wrong and awful and bad to what are the little things that we're doing, and recognizing that we're moving in that direction. And then if something doesn't happen, that we don't globalize it like it always happens in this thing, but this is what happened. And here's again, how we're going to resolve that particular thing and address that thing to be able to fix it.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that's really so key. I would just add to it, to what Pam's saying. I totally agree. You got to figure out what's the history, what's going on before you start launching into solutions. But there are some good techniques and general strategies that can be used. One thing we've only touched on really briefly, and I know all of us on this feel the same way for how important it is. It's empathy, 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 empathy. The more we can demonstrate, truly empathy and with each other, the better off we're going to be, and the more likely we can get to the heart of this. The other, I think, is to understand relationship building, and that friendships are really built on mutual vulnerability and forgiveness. Some of my strongest relationships in work and other places, initially there's a conflict. One of the things I know Pam and I both feel strongly about, conflicts can be wonderfully helpful to understand what we're doing and figure things out and all of that, mostly if there's psychological safety amongst the team. Teams are more effective when there is, and if they can relate, but then also this willingness to be very vulnerable with each other. It's just a wonderful, wonderful approach. The last thing I would say for groups is two quick things, one specific to mining, one not. So the one not, so there's a concept of so for like an office or a group or something where they're just not engaging really well with each other. It may be bumps, it may be bruises, or it may be head banging, as Griffin and Goodwin get at in the Conflict Survival Kit, a good book especially for supervisors. But if you can develop a civility code, something that the law firm Brian Cave Associates have, and follow it, really embrace it. So I've done expert witness work for them, And I've gone into their offices here in the Valley, here in Phoenix, and I've seen their civility code. This is how we will treat each other. We will say hi to each other in the elevator. We will respect each other's time. We will be concerned. We will deal with incivility. And Brian Cave Associates, especially their Orange County office in Cali, has been at the top of the most desired employer to work for in large part because of this. So there are small scale one-on-one techniques and strategies, and there are definitely large scale. I'll really quickly mention the Fishbowl Technique, which I know, Pam knows a lot about, can be a good one so everyone can hear each other. And then I'll just lastly say, what are the stories that we tell ourselves and about others? And what are the stories we can tell each other to help really bond and understand and communicate much more effectively with each other?
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes too, it's good to take a group that hasn't been getting along outside of their normal environment, make them accomplish something together in a different environment. So we've done like low ropes courses together, especially where somebody can kind of break down and debrief what's working, what's not working with teams when they're doing it. So that the team can, again, we're trying to create positive experiences, can feel that ability to overcome together, and really help them with reframing. When I was teaching small groups, I told everybody, the group that has the greatest challenges throughout the semester is going to gain more in this class than people that breeze through it. And so it's that shift, and conflict isn't negative. Conflict bonds people. I got to study a national championship team, and I will tell you that the thing that they had to overcome together is what made them so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we shift that focus to that, it can definitely help.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. Well, Mark, I hope this was all helpful for you.
Yes, very much so.
Thanks for coming on. All right. So we are officially over our scheduled time here. We do usually try to last an extra 15 minutes on top of that, just to get through the rest of the questions and answers that are present. So if either of you need to jump right now, we completely understand. And a big thank you for joining us today, sharing your expertise, creating the space for everyone. But if you're able to stay for another 10 or so minutes, there are a few more questions I think that we'd like to get to.
I can stay.
I can stay for a few more minutes.
Okay, fantastic. So one thing from Jennifer here, asking for information about those conflict and emotional tools that are being discussed, whether those could be shared. So yeah, we have those in the chat. I shared that with everybody as well. I think I took those links that Pam, you posted, so those should be there. And I can make sure to get those onto the webinar page when we post the recording as well, so you all can come back and visit that and see that again. And then we have a question here from Hans asking, how do you encourage the other parties in a conflict situation to agree with you, to review it as an outside issue, to put the issue aside and examine from ourselves?
That's a loaded question. There's got to be some rapport. I mean, that's the challenge. I think Jonathan mentioned several times, is you've got to find what is it that you actually have commonalities in. What is the first thing you can agree to? And there was this example study done where they were trying to figure out how people can learn to resolve when they are basically on polar opposites of opinion of things. And they had the group dealing with, say, abortion. They're on opposite sides and they need to come together and they need to figure out what they're doing. Before they came together, they made the groups read an article about another issue, such as gun control. And the article on gun control was written from the perspective of, so here's what we have in common, and here's what side A said, and here's what side B said. And then they went into this resolution on abortion. And they found that the groups that didn't have anything to read went in and they were antagonistic. They stayed on their polar opposites. But if they all had to read this article, they did come together and at least agree on stuff, but then they still kind of held back. And then they had a third group that went in and they were reading an article where the article was written in a way that said, so this is a really difficult topic. There are many sides to it. It's not that any one is right or wrong. Here's what they all agree upon in the issues. And then they went by each section and said, here's where this side comes from and why they have their point of view. So they read that article. And when the groups read that article first, they were able to fairly quickly work together to come to what are their commonalities, where were their differences, without jumping at each other, because they saw that framework. And so I think that's important to think about when you're coming in and you've got a group that's really antagonistic, to go, hey, can we look at this other example of something and see what we can apply to it? So it's not me coming in and going, here's the way we're going to do it, because the other person's still going to be opposed, but say, hey, you know, we're really dealing at what other experts, what other situations can we look at that are similar, and pull that into the room. And sometimes that will help bring people to the side, because they don't feel like it's just my opinion. It's, we're both looking at this other example to pull it in.
Yeah, especially during a conflict like that. Trying to jump too far ahead can sometimes really set you back. Like very early on, very intentional baby steps that are calculated and I think calibrated to the emotions of the room and the people and the situation are very critical to, saying very a lot, are critical to getting forward to a point where you can say, okay, let's take a look at this from outside. And of course, you get the information that you need to fuel those very calculated little steps forwards by asking those open-ended questions, by asking, what happened? You know, how did you feel? Tell me about a time where X, Y, and Z thing went. And that will, you know, hopefully give you the information you need to make those further steps. And looks like we have one comment here from Kristen saying, it may be helpful to know how you initially react to conflict, as well as your something. It cuts off there. Most people react in a predictable order: analyze, assert, accommodate. There's a course, core strengths, that helps evaluate that and what motivates you. People, process, performance, and results. It has been super helpful and I highly recommend it. So the course that Kristen mentions is called Core Strengths, and hopefully that is useful for everybody. And then we've got one more question here from Tammy asking, what if the boss expectations are putting so much pressure on a group that they can no longer work as a team and the boss won't change? What are some things that you can do to relieve conflict within the team? And I think that's a very common situation for a lot of us where, you know, we feel like, I know exactly how I could solve this if I could just get that help from up above. So maybe there are solutions for compelling or demonstrating to people up above what you can do, which is another kind of conflict. And also saying, okay, well, I'm the new ceiling. What do I have in my power to do for the people below me?
Yeah, Pam does executive coaching, so I really want to hear from her, but I'll just kick it off and say, you know, it depends so much on circumstances. You know, has someone had a heart-to-heart with the boss in a good way to really get at this? And I think Pam can talk about that much more than I. But then, so let's just put that aside, and maybe there isn't much, as I think Tammy is getting at. And so for me, and I've had to deal with things like this, and it's okay, within the constraints that I've got, how can I help? What are the things I can do? How can I make the lives of this team better in whatever way? What do I personally, professionally have control over? Where can I make influences? And so I'll give you a very quick example. Having to deal with safety culture, and I was talking with some department lab managers, and I said, here's what I'd like to do, here's my plan. And one of the lab managers reached out and said, hey, can we talk? And I said, sure. And I met with her and her boss, who was very, very supportive. And it was about someone way up on high, that if I had gone forward with my plan, which I thought was a solid plan and might have been, but I was not aware of this other issue that would have created a significant problem for this lab manager. And her boss even confirmed that. She's like, yes, John, she's saying the truth. This will be a problem. I can't go into details for, I think, obvious reasons. And so I reframed, I changed. I took my plan and I said, all right, no, I didn't know. I'm glad you told me. Let's talk about what is doable here. So in that moment, I developed trust. I gave her the reins of control. what's another solution to try to do that will really work okay with you that avoids this other problematic person up on high. Pam, what about your experiences doing executive coaching with CEOs and others? What can you add?
I will say that it helps if you can get, I want to say, outside support from outside the team. So I had to work with a situation where the toxic leader indirectly felt like but a board came to me and said, Pam, we want you to help. We're going to suggest it to the leader so that the leader's the one bringing you in. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm getting stuck in this really precarious situation. And the leader was fairly toxic. And when I went to meet with the people, it's kind of like this description. The people like, God, I don't even want to work here. A lot of them were starting to put their resumes out. Like, we're done. So my mission was to bring them together. And we did, I want to say a value sort where we got it. What is the heart of what this team, like we bring the team back together and go, so why are we here? Take the boss out of it. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And what's important to me? So the value sort was for them as an individual, and then as a team to collectively say, this is what we stand for. And so in that meeting, even though I had the other person in the room, I kind of got to control it. And we went back to what do we really stand for? So if it's you and you know that the whole team is suffering, you could just take the team aside and say, okay, here's what we're dealt with. And maybe we can't change it. Or maybe you can go around to the other people and to gain support to deal with it. Because I know they had went outside. That's how the board got aware of the fact that they needed to do something, was because people went to the board and then the board kind of brought me in. So I just went again to that real grounding thing of why are we here? Why are we doing? And then what are at least the little things that we can do? Because if you unify the team, not that you're trying to unify the team against the boss, but if you unify that voice of the team, it gives them power to stand up in a session and go, we're not taking any more. And literally did this with the team. They came together, they really found their vision and mission again. And they're like, God, yeah, this is why we do what we do. Thanks for reminding us what we do. And so when the toxic leader did one of those, yeah, we're going to do this. And everybody just looked at the boss and they looked at each other and they said, we're not going to do that. And here's why. And as a team, they stood up together and said, here's what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. Because this is what, and they went back to the meeting that I had run and said, here's where we came up and said, this is what's important. So we're sticking by that. That's our integrity saying, this is what we're going to stick by. And the boss was like without power at that point. Like, she's either going to fire all of us or none of us, like, boom. And so it was a very intense and it was very difficult, but the more you can bring at least the team together to unify around something and say, okay, here's the short term, how do we deal with the boss? Or here's the long term, how do we deal with the boss? Can help. And again, I would say in cases that if it's really like in this one where it really got toxic, you have to gain the outside support to make people aware of what's happening so that you can get some other advocates to step in. So you have to determine that level.
Yep.
Fantastic advice. Definitely. All right. Well, we are here past the end of our webinar at 4:15 Eastern. Going to take one quick look at our word cloud again and kind of just see what topics people are interested in. Always great to get that open response that the Zoom survey may not allow all the time to see, what's on everybody's mind. And another huge thank you to our panelists. This was just a great conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. And hopefully one day I'll be able to get those things into practice in real time as well. But thank you for making the space for everybody. Thank you to our attendees for engaging with us, for sharing all those questions, and for coming back and learning with us every week. So it's great to see you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciated it. It was great to work with you guys.
Thanks. Great to see you, Pam. Of course, as always, we'll be chatting.
Yep.
All right. Goodbye, everybody, and have a fantastic weekend.